I've even put a jacket on.
I thought I put my lanyard on.
Yeah.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I can see people virtually wandering into this session today. So we'll just give it a couple of minutes before we make a start. Thank you for joining us today for our conference session all around post-qualification admissions. It's great to virtually see you all. And yeah, good morning, everyone. Hope everyone's keeping well. Hope everyone's nervously looking forward to the match tomorrow. And then we'll see how that goes. It's great to be joined by Mary this morning. Thank you for joining us, Mary. It's hugely appreciated as ever. We'll kick off in just a minute. See a few more people hopping into the session. And great. So I think we'll make a start, and people will probably join us throughout the next 40 minutes or so. So yeah, thank you very much for joining our session today on all things post-qualification admissions. It's obviously a topic of much discussion within universities, and I imagine schools and colleges at the moment, with the consultation fairly recently closing to gather people's thoughts. I know there was a lot of discussion amongst teams like ourselves here at Leicester and across the sector. So it'd be really interesting to see the outcome, and I'm delighted to be joined by Mary Curnock Cook this morning, who's going to give a really thorough overview of the kind of the discussion point in general, but also the kind of pros-ish and some cons about what might arise with the outcome of the consultation. Just in terms of the conference as well, this session is being recorded. So if you have got colleagues that would like to watch this type of content afterwards and are interested in this topic particularly, then it will be available afterwards. They can still register for the conference, and they'll be able to access this session, but also the other about 60 sessions we've run over this marathon conference that we launched in towards the end of May. And there's been a fantastic range of sessions, all the way back in the start. We had keynote updates from UCAS, from the BBC, from Microsoft Education, all the way through to our closing session on Thursday of this week, which is going to be delivered by the Student Room. So if you are interested in signing up for that, then please do. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Mary. If you've got any questions or thoughts or comments or rants or vents or anything at all about this particular topic, then please do feel free to use the chat all the way through. We'll curate any questions that come through and put those to Mary at the end of her presentation. But without further ado, I'll pass over to Mary.
Well, thanks a million, Elliot, and thank you very much for inviting me back, even if virtually, to Leicester. Just give me a couple of seconds while I put some slides up, and then we'll get started. So here we go. Share and slideshow. Right, Elliot, can you just give me a thumbs up if you can see my slides okay? Fantastic. So here we go. Let's talk about PQA, post-qualifications admissions or post-qualifications applications. Nobody quite knows what it stands for anymore, but PQA means post-qualifications something. Just a brief update on me, because most people know me as the former Chief Executive of UCAS, but actually I left UCAS over 4 years ago now. It seems a very long time ago, and I'm now a serial non-exec on a number of boards. So I'm on the Open University, the Student Loans Company, don't hate me too much for that. I chair the Access Project, which helps disadvantaged students get into top universities. I chair the Dyson Institute, which is a really interesting innovation in the higher education sector, and also the London Interdisciplinary School, which is another newcomer taking its first students this autumn. Also involved with some agencies, the Student Room and HEPI, the Higher Education Policy Institute. On the advisory side, I've become a bit of an EdTech wonk, but we won't be talking much about that today. So let's start with some context for the recurring debate about PQA, which I sometimes feel like it's a sort of a cuckoo call that comes round every year, with somebody calling for, let's not do this how we've always done it, and let's do it post admissions. And I think the things that have amplified this debate in recent times is a lot of discomfort and headlines about unconditional offers, and I'll say a bit more about that in a minute. The whole thing about equality and a feeling that applying with predicted grades disadvantages people who are already perhaps disadvantaged. And then there was some research done a year or two ago about students who kind of undermatch or overmatch in terms of their applications because their predicted grades are wrong. And all of that produced this slew of reviews about admissions over the last couple of years. So the Office for Students, the regulator of the English higher education system, actually backed off because there was so many other reviews being done by other people. Universities UK, which is the representative body for UK universities, they conducted a review. UCAS obviously has done some work on it, and then more recently we've had the Department for Education wading in and, in fact, as Elliot said, doing a consultation on what might be taken forward. I think generally the mood music is that the department is fairly determined to make some change in the admissions system, which after all has been pretty much unchanged for over 50 years now. So just the unconditional offers, which I felt was very much a catalyst for these, this more amplified call for PQA, which, as I said, it does come around pretty much every year, but somehow the whole unconditional offers thing seems to have been a catalyst for this more amplified debate. Some of that was about the UCAS data on unconditional offers showing that they tended to depress students' attainment in their A levels. I think the whole kind of marketization of higher education, in other words, that universities needed to attract students who come with their tuition fee loan from the student loans company, that's their kind of source of revenue. So the fact that recruitment has become a marketing exercise. And then there was this whole sort of bums on seats narrative. I think it was one of the university ministers who coined the phrase, and it pops up every now and again, and it's a sort of it's now the label given to universities who are strong on marketing their courses. So just looking at the UCAS data on unconditional offers, I've taken the 2019 end of cycle report because I feel like the 2020 cycle wasn't a real cycle. And if you remember, unconditional offers were sort of banned at the beginning of the pandemic and so on. So just looking at the data from the last normal cycle, and the UCAS report said that 37% of 18-year-old applicants from England, Northern Ireland and Wales. We don't have Scotland in this because Scotland have a sort of a post-qualification system anyway. 37% received an offer with some form of unconditional element in it. Over a quarter of all applicants received a conditional unconditional offer. So that's where they were given the opportunity to make their offer unconditional if they made that university offer their first firm choice. And this has been escalating over a number of years from about 2013 when they started appearing as in effect a kind of a marketing effort. Applicants from more advantaged backgrounds are more likely to receive these unconditional offers than those from disadvantaged backgrounds. And then, of course, there are some, particularly arts and so on, who might get an unconditional offer for completely separate reasons. So you can see why this whole unconditional offer thing, which I think most people have found quite distasteful, and certainly back in the day when I was talking to teachers and advisors and students and parents, the feedback was that it was felt to be detrimental for students who would just take their foot off the pedal. And of course, we've seen the data that shows that A-level grades get depressed as a result. So, so there's some context to the current clarion calls for PQA. Just a bit of history from the last sort of 3 or 4 serious calls for PQA. So going back to 2004, a higher education review called the Swartz Review, they recommended that PQA should be investigated. It was investigated rather half-heartedly, it has to be said, and nothing happened. Then we had a white paper from David Willits when he was Universities Minister in 2011, Students at the Heart of the System, where he called again for the sector to look at a post-qualifications approach. And in fact, as a result of that call in the white paper, UCAS undertook a very thorough piece of research and consultation while I was there as chief exec, and we consulted, and the result, we actually consulted on a very thoroughly researched PQA model, and the answer back from the university sector was no thanks. This would be really difficult to do in the compressed timescale, but quite surprisingly, when we put in front of schools who'd always been in favour of PQA, schools also, when they actually saw what the process would involve, also said, we don't think we can manage this. So let's just finish with this unassailable logic. And this is why this PQA question just has never gone away. It just seems to make sense. Why would you apply with predicted grades when you should apply with actual grades and know exactly what your kind of currency for applying to various courses would be? And some of the common arguments which you all will have heard is that too many students' grades are under predicted, that this a PQA system would be much better for disadvantaged students. Everyone will kind of know where they stand with actual grades applying for courses with advertised minimum entry requirements. And then this, I think, actually a false narrative that everyone else in the world does it like this. And actually, when you drill down into how admission systems work in other countries, it's not quite as simple as that. You've probably heard, even thought these arguments yourself. But I've always wondered whether PQA is actually a solution looking for a problem, and I really felt that quite keenly with the recent consultation. It was as if we'd forgotten what the problem we were trying to solve was, and PQA itself had become such a goal that that's what was being consulted on rather than really thinking through. And the reason that I put this question is that actually the system, which has served us pretty well, as I said, for over 50 years, continues to be pretty robust through all sorts of changes. If you think about the vast growth in higher education over those 50 years, in capped and uncapped student number systems, and in different marketplaces where the supply and demand balance has flipped either way. Yet still over 90% of applicants get at least one offer. Around 3/4 get into their first choice of university. You know, that's a very, very high strike rate for an application. And my view would be that actually the predicted grade system works really well for the vast majority. Now, the flip side of what we were talking about unconditional offers is, of course, if you're saying getting an unconditional offer is going to make you perform slightly less well in your A-levels, then the corollary to that argument is that a conditional offer actually really motivates students. And actually having that offer in their back pocket, you know, several months before they take their exam is a real motivator, and potentially very helpful for them in terms of kind of seeing an end goal and something to kind of power them through the dark days of revising for their exams. There's also something about, quite a long period over which students have got plenty of time to go and visit universities, make their choices, arrange their accommodation, apply for loans, all of those administrative things that go on in the background. And of course, plenty of options if something goes wrong. So the extra service and clearing, which is just completely transformed from when I first arrived at UCAS, when it really was the luck of the draw whether you got through on the telephone on A-level results morning. And now, of course, universities will typically have probably hundreds of people on the telephone ready to take calls and genuinely wanting to engage with applicants who, for whatever reason, are engaging with clearing. And what this does is it leaves you in schools and colleges free to concentrate on what is always a fairly small proportion of students who find themselves in clearing who want to change their mind. So you haven't got your whole sixth form to take through the system. So just to kind of put some numbers on this, excuse me, about 350 students each year in England and Wales have conditional offers based on their A-level or BTEC grades. And that's how many students, if we had a post-results system, that's roughly how many students would need to be advised and handheld through the system. Excuse me, I'm just going to take a gulp of my coffee to get rid of this frog in my throat. Okay, hopefully that's better. Now, of course, at the moment, applicants have got 5 choices, 5 applications that they can make through the UCAS system. So, multiply that up, that's 1.7 million applications that get processed through the university's admissions offices. Let's just say in a PQA system, you reduce that to 2 applications per applicant, and big question there, by the way, as to whether you would want to reduce it to 2. You've still got near enough 750,000 applications for universities to process during that time. But for you in schools and colleges, that's 350,000 students needing support around decisions, offers, etc. It's a 350,000 student finance applications to be made in that short window of 6 to 8 weeks between exam results being published and the start of the university term. So I just kind of put that up to remind you that there's a big administrative process that has to take place, whatever format this post-qualifications system takes. There's a big process with a large number of students which will need to be undertaken in a short window of time. And, what about open day visits? What about accommodation, booking, pre-enrollment paperwork, and so on? Excuse me. And all of this in the school holidays. All of this in the school holidays. Now, you're used to coming back into school for a day or two to deal with the small number of students who find themselves in clearing or changing their minds. But that would have to be more than a couple of days to come back in. One of the things I remember from the consultation we did back in 11-12 was that actually parents were quite against this, because they said, hang on, we want to go on holiday, and if we've got to be at home for a kind of an extended period of weeks while our kids go through a post-application system, so I think we shouldn't forget that people do actually need some time off in the school holidays as well. And I think there are some more risks as well. Disadvantage for the disadvantaged. So my feeling is that kids who are from lower income background, who are perhaps kind of borderline, whether they go to university, may not have family support. For if they're first in generation, they may not have family support. Those are the ones who are less likely to come back into school to engage with a process after their exam results have come through. Indeed, they might be working by then. A lot of people have said, well, wouldn't this just be one big clearing? Now, clearing is still quite a kind of fast-paced and difficult process for those who are involved in it, although it's got so much better in recent years. But if all our students were going through that, would it feel like just one big kind of scramble for everybody to match up to places with rushed decisions being made? And one thing that I think has been underplayed a lot is that the current system, it allows universities to have visibility of what the demand is for their courses. They can work out pretty much how many students they're likely to have. They can plan their resources. They've got the teachers in place for the courses that that they've got applicants for, and they can actually make sure that students can start in the autumn in an orderly way with all the resources in place. So yeah, I think all of those things will need to be addressed if we move to a different system. It's a big system change, and it doesn't just affect students and universities. It affects the exam boards. It affects parents and families. It affects private candidates, all sorts of people. It's not just about universities and students. This is a big kind of ecosystem change, and therefore I think some quite big risks associated with that. So let's just talk about what the government has consulted on. So on the one hand, they've put forward a proposal for a full post-qualifications application offers decisions all taking place post exams. My sense is that everyone is backing off that kind of big bang option quite hastily, and I have a feeling that won't happen. Instead, we've got what I think is a slightly half-baked option, which is post-qualification offers. So in other words, all the applications and supposedly the visits and so on would be done on the current timetable. Question mark, what would happen about Oxford and Cambridge applications? What would happen about portfolios, auditions, interviews, etc.? This is not mapped out in the government's consultation paper and still remains to be resolved. And the idea is that you would put in your applications and you would then not receive your offers until your results had been confirmed. But there was, I think actually in the Universities UK mapping of this process was the idea that students might at least receive rejections before their exams. And I was thinking, great, well, that's lovely. If, if all you receive is rejections before you take your exams, that could be quite demotivating and a bit depressing. So I hope nobody's planning to do that. But then the offers made by university and students' decisions about those offers are made after results. Not a lot of detail about how many offers, how long people would have to decide. Students might get 5 offers off 5 applications. That happens quite a lot now, and so there's no reason why it wouldn't happen post results as well. So that's what's being proposed. I'm going to put this slide up. I don't know how well you'll be able to see it. Yeah, I think it's the column on the far right of your screen that maps out the process. My view is that if that's a process map, it's not really good enough for us to make what, as I said, could be, a very big system change, even with this sort of halfway house of post-qualification offers, a big system change needs a lot more detailed process mapping to really understand the impacts at each stage of this change on different players in the system. Government does seem to be suggesting that exam results could be a little bit earlier, so they're normally in the middle of August, and they're saying on this that the results might come in at the end of July or early August. I'm not quite sure how the exam boards are supposed to do that, since I remember it being quite a march up to the final deadline for marking, even for the results days in the middle of August. And of course, there's no detail about how many offers and how many decisions, or whether if you reject one offer, do you go on to the next one? How long is the offer held open for? A lot of details which would need to be worked out. You can find these diagrams for what they're worth in the consultation document. The consultation has now closed. Just keeping an eye on the time here. So here are a few things to think about. So you don't get off the hook on predicted grades, because if you're asking your students to go off and research universities and make applications before their results, they're still going to need some sort of prediction about their grades in order that they don't, apply for the wrong university course because they're unlikely to get the grades to match the minimum requirements of that course. So you're still going to have to predict those grades. I wonder, and we might want to talk about this in a minute, whether you think students will feel more or less anxious or more or less motivated if they don't have a conditional offer. They're just kind of doing their exams in a kind of vacuum of knowing who might make them an offer when their results come in. And I actually wonder whether that might increase exam stress, when actually everything hinges on your exam results, whereas in the current system, at least, the amount of time, the personal statement, the opportunity for visits and so on, means that a more holistic assessment is made. And a lot of universities now are making contextual offers where they'll take into account a student's background circumstances when thinking about their predicted grades, and maybe all of that just goes out the window, and universities will just be wanting to recruit people with the highest possible grades. For schools and colleges, a lot of thought needs to be given to how you go about supporting all your university applicants after exam results, as opposed to just probably the normally fairly small proportion who find themselves without a confirmed offer and potentially in clearing. And I wonder also, there are a lot of open days that take place after results, so that people can kind of do a final confirming visit. Will applicants actually not want to visit universities until they know whether they've got in? So will we also have to accommodate a lot of university trips and so on? And as I said before, will your underrepresented groups come back into school to complete the process? And that's probably the thing that worries me most, and a sort of don't forget about accommodation and student finance. So just to wrap up, I feel that this whole debate, this recurring debate about post-qualifications admissions, is the enemy of the peace is the predicted grade. It's seen as something that's massively incorrect, but actually the reality of the situation is that probably only about 20% of predicted grades. Remember, you're predicting across normally three A-level grades, and the regulator themselves say that the grades they award will only be correct to within one grade each. So even if the exam markers can't predict the grades accurately, it's not surprising that it's not 100% correct over 3 grades. So only about 20% are correct. About 60% are over predicted, and that's what you're expected to do. You're expected to indicate through predicted grades what you think the potential for this student, on a really good day, if they've worked really hard, nothing's gone wrong, the hamster hasn't died, and what could they be capable of, and that's completely priced into the university admission system. Admissions offices know that grades are over predicted. They've got years of data that allow them to calculate quite precisely what proportion of their applicants are likely to get the grades and which are not. And by the way, grades are quite often over predicted by, across the 3 A levels by several grades, over predicted, whereas the under prediction, which is less than 20% of students, usually only just 1 grade under predicted. So, the villain of the piece, predicted grades, is actually a very predictable, unpredictable data set. And we've got years of data that allow us to understand this quite well. And I think also with contextual offers and so on, that the potential downsides of underprediction are largely mitigated. So those are my thoughts. Thank you very much for listening to me. I'm on Twitter if you are as well and want to contact me, and there's an email address there. And I'm going to stop sharing and see if anybody's got any thoughts or questions.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Mary. A really, really interesting look at the topic. And I know it's something that I imagine will be discussed at future conferences like this one over the next however long, particularly after the consultation kind of response is publicized, and whatever the decision of whoever the people in charge at that time are, I suppose, but we'll have to wait and see. I think one of the things of most concern for me as an institution, we've led quite a big student transition project this year for our offer holders joining us in September, and I'm not sure that type of thing could run on such a kind of a big holistic scale, but also in terms of a time period. Some of the timescales you mentioned as part of those processes just wouldn't allow that type of approach. And actually, that's for some of those more disadvantaged or students with higher levels of anxieties or worries or concerns, those timescales just are not quite going to do the trick. So we've had a question in where the first 2 words are Gavin Williamson. So this could be interesting. So Gavin Williamson seems very keen on the whole PQA plan, which I think raises far more issues, never mind the workload for teachers over summer. So what do you think, if you were to put a pound on the outcome, what do you think is likely to be the outcome? And do you think the impact of COVID on the past couple of admission cycles will be factored in? Obviously, we've got the teacher assessed grades this year, and I guess we'll have to wait to see as a sector how that kind of pans out. But do you think they'll almost the outcome of this consultation is will be taking that into consideration as well?
Well, it's a really good question. Thank you, Nicola. As I said earlier, the mood music seems to be that the department is determined to do something on this. My hope is that they'll make a sensible decision to take some baby steps, and that they'll do it really carefully, because, as I said, it's underestimate the kind of system impacts of a change in this quite finely balanced ecosystem that affects the lives of hundreds of thousands of school leavers wanting to go to university. My advice to the department has been, don't do this now. I mean, we've had 2 years of disrupted exams. We're being told that there are going to be adjustments to the way exams are held, marked, assessed, etc. next year. I'm guessing that might go on for another year after that. Who knows what lockdowns and things might happen over the coming period. So I think the first thing to say is that undertaking a big system change right now, when there is so much turbulence in the school system for students who've missed out on their teaching and learning, and there's so much uncertainty about how exams will be graded and how they'll be held and so on. So I just think it's the wrong time to do it. I would definitely push it into the future. But I suspect politically it would be hard for the government to row back and do nothing on all of this. So I suspect something will happen. Incidentally, I'll if I've got a moment, I'll just I'll put a link in the chat to a really good set of essays that the Higher Education Policy Institute published, including obviously an excellent one from me. But some really good, and I really recommend reading the one from Mark Corver on predicted grades. But there's some other really insightful essays in that collection, which just might help you kind of think about it.
Perfect. So we've had another question around the impact of a change to our admission system on continuation and or success rates for undergraduate students. There could be an argument that students, by having more opportunity and maybe a bit more time than the current process to choose that right choice for them, would that help in terms of almost matching to their kind of academic ability and interest, or do you think the counter argument of the time scales involved in the process once selecting that offer at a university would kind of outweigh that argument?
Yeah, it's interesting this, because that was one real benefit I saw from moving to PQA when we did the consultation 10 years ago. I can't believe it's that long. And I felt that, young people, they do a lot of maturing, don't they, in that last year at school, and the kid who enters year 13 or upper sixth is sometimes quite a different young adult 6 or 9 months later. And I felt that moving to a full PQA system might be better for those young people, because they would have gone through that maturing. They will have settled properly into that kind of slightly more mature learning and a bit more independent learning that happens in the second year of sixth form around their BTECs and their A levels, and that not asking them to apply quite so early in that journey would give them more time to be a bit more settled about who they are and what they really want to study. But of course, the halfway house, the PQO, the post-qualification offer model doesn't give you that benefit. You'll still be doing your applications early on, and that's a potential worry about that process, is that kids who have gone through that kind of maturing and changing and emerging young adult phase during their last year at school or college might want to just make a whole bunch of new applications. So you could have a kind of, an amplified clearing and PQO offers all over the place, with universities, because they haven't completed the main offer and decision-making process, won't know how many places they've got left over for people who've changed their mind and done new applications. So clearing, as conceptually, changes in this model, and people who are in clearing for whatever reason would have to wait until the kind of main bulk of offers and decisions had been made. Kind of yes and no is my answer to that one.
No, that's great. Thank you very much. Yeah, I think it's one that it will definitely divide opinion, won't it? And there'll be strong arguments either way, and it'll be very interesting to see how it kind of transpires. And I guess for one of the things, again, with a university outreach hackathon is trying to get this advice out to students at a particularly early age, actually, in terms of the way that they'll have to kind of pit their way through the education system if they're looking at kind of progressing on to university. And obviously the move from the potential move from the government to almost kind of divide up routes between the academic route, you got the technical route and apprenticeship route, etc., and how that's reflected is an interesting one.
Yeah, and yes, and I probably should have said, of course, we're expecting a slew of of policy announcements over the coming months, which could kind of fundamentally change what you're applying for and why you're applying, because you know, that there may well be student number caps again. There may be minimum entry requirements. I don't know, Elliot, whether you heard the speech that Gavin Williamson made at the HEPI conference, suggesting the minimum entry requirements would be at GCSE level, not at A level, which I think everyone was expecting it would be. You've got to have 2 Ds or equivalent.
Yes, yeah.
You know, something like that. And I mean, I think there is pretty much a minimum entry requirement that you've got GCSE English and mathematics. I don't think there's many courses, maybe for mature students, but for school leavers, I think pretty much every university requires you to have English.
Yeah, I know at Leicester it's kind of in our I think they're called Senate regulations. Essentially, it's built into very much that, and equivalencies are I think where relevant included as well. But yeah, it didn't seem as radical a suggestion as maybe it seemed to be maybe when it was potentially more of a focus on the level 3 qualification that you might need to have to then enter higher education.
I mean, I suppose it's possible that they'd say you've got to have a grade 5 rather than the grade 4 pass at GCSE English and Maths, which kind of in itself I don't think would necessarily be a bad thing. But then suddenly, you know, the funneling of the wheat from the chaff, if you like, through the education journey for young people, you know, is suddenly kind of closed off when you're 16 instead of when you're 18. So yeah, actually it just makes me very cross, because, you know, I was at UCAS for 7 and a bit years, and I was still learning corners of how the application, the university application and admissions ecosystem worked when I left. And it actually just really annoys me when people who don't understand it properly think they can just tinker with it. And the risk of unintended consequences, I think, is high. You can tell, you know, I moved in the consultation I did 10 years ago. I moved from advocating for PQA, thinking this is obviously a good thing. Like I said, it makes sense. And we put together this painstaking mapping of what the process would look like, what would happen, who'd have to do what. But when I read the consultation responses, I changed my mind. You know, I thought, actually, this doesn't make sense. You can't, you know, until you can see all the impacts that reverberate around the whole education system. It's really difficult. But now I've become a kind of boring old detractor against PQA. You probably shouldn't listen to me. I've been out of the front line for too long now.
No, but I think, again, speaking to we as part of my almost voluntary role with Helloa, we submitted a consultation response, and again, taking on board comments and thoughts from kind of schools liaison and outreach colleagues across different universities and bringing it together. The general gist of that was very much what you've been talking about there. It's the unintended consequences. It's particularly with the impact on colleagues that are on today's session in terms of teaching advisors, and how that level of support would vary massively across the sector, and the kind of expectation. I think we've seen it a little bit this summer with, schools can just run little catch-ups over schools. That'll be fine. They'll all want to do that. They'll all be really, really enthused to take that on. It's those sorts of, well, I'm not involved in this particular thing, but I think other people might be interested. Thought that comes out seemingly quite a lot that I'm not quite sure is where realistically people's wants and needs lie. But it's
basically, Elliot, you know, teachers and advisors need a break in the summer. You know, you don't have to go very far, you know, to see how hard teachers and educators in schools and colleges work in term time, you know, and it isn't just 8:30 till 3 or whatever the school hours are. That, you know, I've been a school governor, and all our meetings were, you know, we had 2 meetings a term, and they all started at 6 and went on till 8:39 in the evening, and, you know, half a dozen people would come out from the staff to be at those meetings, plus, you know, parents' evenings, plus marking, plus lesson planning, and so, you know, everyone needs a break, including, by the way, folks in the universities. I know admissions officers clearly, you know, expect to have to work through that period post results. But if you had to bring the entire team in to manage, you know, the full kind of offer process, I think it'd be.
Yeah, there's definitely an interesting thought there around workforce needs within admissions offices as well. If the whole bulk of things move into different times of the year than they are now, and I imagine that's probably one for another time, and maybe the admissions conferences that take place across the sector. But that probably brings us to the end of today's session. I think for the finishing on a note of teaching advisors working particularly hard and earning a well-deserved rest over the summer is a nice place to finish. So yeah, I echo Mary's thoughts there in terms of it's been from kind of the outside, from working with schools but not in schools, it's been really incredible to see the amount of work that's gone on every year, not just because of the pandemic, but particularly over the last 12 to 15 months. That's been hugely highlighted, and I think the if you haven't yet finished, if you're finishing over the next week or 10 days or so, then yeah, absolutely have that well-deserved rest. Try and take a break, go on a little break, whether it's in a different coloured list in terms of the green, or amber, red, or wherever you're going, maybe in the UK, or just sit in the garden for a bit. I think as well that this conversation, as I said, will continue this type of topic, and universities across the UK will obviously either update or work with schools and colleges as and when any announcement is particularly made to ensure that students that will be kind of first impacted, and who knows who that particular cohort might be, that there'll be a heap of support available from colleagues like ourselves, and said at the universities as well. But that's it from this session. So a big thank you again to you, Mary, for joining us again at our Teacher and Advisor Conference. It's been great to hear your thoughts and to see you again. And we'll make sure we will follow you on Twitter to see what's coming up. And just to round off from the Leicester perspective, I said we've got a couple more sessions this week to round off our Teacher and Advisor Conference, and our closing session will be from the student room on Thursday afternoon at 3:30. So if you are able to join us there for kind of a look into student expectations, what students have been chatting about on the student room, and where their thoughts and opinions are lying, then please do join us for that. But thank you very much again, Mary. Thank you for the Teaching Advisors for joining us, and we'll see you all very soon, and have a great summer.
Thanks very much. I've enjoyed being here.
Thanks, Mary.